In the summer of 2018, Christopher Lee Watts appeared to be living the American dream in Frederick, Colorado. The 33-year-old oil field operator was married to Shanann Watts, a vivacious 34-year-old who worked in health and wellness marketing. Together, they had two beautiful daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste. Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant with their third child, a boy they planned to name Nico. From the outside, the Watts family seemed picture-perfect. Shanann regularly posted on social media about their family adventures, vacations, and milestones. Chris appeared to be a devoted husband and father, participating in family activities and supporting his wife's business endeavors. But beneath this carefully curated facade, a darkness was growing that would soon shatter not just this family, but the entire community's sense of safety and trust. In June 2018, just 2 months before the murders, Chris Watts began an affair with a co-worker named Nichol Kessinger. Kessinger would later tell authorities that she had been duped by Watts into thinking his marriage to Shanann was all but formally over. Kessinger didn't learn until after the murders that Watts had never even started divorce proceedings with his wife, that Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant, and that he had been lying to her for the entirety of their brief relationship. Their affair had lasted just over a month before Watts was found guilty of murdering his family. "I wish I had met her at work and just kept it that way," Watts later said about his relationship with Kessinger. "It feels like a roller coaster ride that I just kept punching a ticket on and never could get off." The weekend of August 11th to 12th, 2018, would prove to be the last weekend the Watts family would spend together. Shanann had been in North Carolina visiting her family with Bella and Celeste for several weeks. During this time, Chris had been spending romantic weekends with Kessinger, living as if he were a single man. Shanann returned home from her trip in the early morning hours of August 13, 2018, dropped off by a friend after a delayed flight. She was exhausted from travel and eager to reconnect with her husband, unaware that Chris had already made the unthinkable decision about their family's fate. In the early hours of August 13, 2018, in Frederick, Colorado, Christopher Lee Watts murdered his pregnant wife Shanann by strangulation and their two children Bella and Celeste by suffocation. The sequence of events, as later reconstructed by investigators and Chris's own confessions, began with an argument between Chris and Shanann about their marriage and his affair. After a police investigation revealed his infidelity, he ultimately admitted to strangling Shanann during a confrontation about their marriage and smothering the girls to conceal the crime. Chris later claimed in various accounts that Shanann had threatened to keep the children from him if he left her, though investigators and behavioral experts questioned the reliability of his self-serving narratives. What is certain is that sometime in the early morning hours, Chris Watts made the calculated decision to murder his entire family rather than face the consequences of divorce and the end of his affair. After committing the murders, Chris Watts loaded his family's bodies into his work truck and drove to a remote oil worksite owned by his employer, Anadarko Petroleum. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave near an oil storage facility, while the bodies of Bella and Celeste were stuffed into oil tanks. The location was chosen strategically. It was remote, rarely visited by others, and Chris had legitimate access to the site through his work. He believed the oil tanks would completely dissolve his daughters' bodies, leaving no trace of the crime. When Chris returned home that morning, he began what would become a 3-day performance designed to cover his tracks. He texted Shanann's phone, pretending to wonder where she was. He called her friends, expressing concern about her absence. He even called the girls' school to report them absent. When Shanann's friend Nicole Atkinson came to check on her after Shanann failed to respond to texts and missed a doctor's appointment, Chris put on the performance of his life. He appeared confused and worried, claiming he had no idea where his family could be. Initially, Chris seemed concerned when his pregnant wife Shanann Watts and his two young daughters Bella and Celeste seemingly vanished in August 2018. He participated in television interviews, pleading for his family's safe return. In one particularly chilling interview, he begged for whoever had taken his family to bring them home safely, all while knowing exactly where their bodies were. but investigators quickly became suspicious of Chris's behavior. His demeanor seemed off, he appeared more annoyed than distraught, and his body language didn't match his words of concern. Neighbors provided security camera footage that contradicted some of Chris's statements about the timeline of events. Chris failed a polygraph test and confessed to his father Ronnie, and then officials, that he killed Shanann, but falsely claimed initially that she had smothered their daughters. This lie was designed to minimize his culpability and paint himself as a man who had killed in a moment of rage rather than someone who had methodically murdered his children. On August 16, 2018, Shanann, Bella and Celeste's bodies were found at the oil worksite where Chris had directed authorities. The discovery of their bodies confirmed the worst fears of investigators and the community. Watts was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder in their deaths, including 2 additional first-degree murder charges that accused him of causing the death of a child under age 12. He faced 9 charges total, including several counts of first-degree murder. Rather than face a potential death penalty trial, Chris Watts ultimately pleaded guilty to all charges. Chris Watts will die in prison after pleading guilty to killing his pregnant wife and his 2 young daughters. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional years for other charges. The most disturbing aspect of the Chris Watts case is understanding his motive. Chris Watts killed his wife and 2 daughters in Colorado in August 2018, alleging his alleged motive was to be with his mistress. In his twisted thinking, Chris Watts saw his family not as beloved relatives deserving of life and love, but as obstacles to the new life he wanted with Nichol Kessinger. Rather than face the financial and emotional challenges of divorce, child support, custody arrangements, social judgment, and the possibility that Kessinger might not want a relationship with a divorced father, he chose to eliminate what he saw as the problem. Chris Watts described his mistress as forbidden fruit, as he detailed the affair that was the alleged motive for him killing his wife and their 2 children in chilling prison letters. On September 1, 2018, Shanann, Bella and Celeste were buried in Pinehurst, North Carolina. Shanann's family described her as an ambitious, outgoing woman who had dreams and aspirations that were cut short by the man who had promised to love and protect her. August 13, 2024, marked the 6th anniversary of Chris Watts' horrific murders of his wife, Shanann Watts, and their 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste. This case remains one of the most shocking in American history and continues to capture public attention. The Chris Watts case represents a particularly disturbing category of murder known as family annihilation. These cases share several common characteristics. Control and narcissism. Family annihilators often cannot tolerate losing control of their narrative or facing public judgment about their failures as husbands and fathers. All-or-nothing thinking. They view their options in absolute terms, either they have their ideal life or they destroy everything that stands in the way of it. Dehumanization. They begin viewing family members as obstacles rather than as individual human beings with their own right to life. Cowardice disguised as control. Despite appearing to take decisive action, these murders often represent the ultimate act of cowardice, an inability to face the normal consequences of adult decisions. Even after his conviction and imprisonment, Chris Watts has continued to show a disturbing lack of genuine remorse. Chris Watts murdered his wife Shanann and his daughters Bella and Celeste amid his affair with Nichol Kessinger. He blames the Jezebel that tempted him. In letters and interviews from prison, Watts has continued to blame Shanann for pushing him to have an affair and has blamed Kessinger for tempting him. This ongoing refusal to take full responsibility for his choices demonstrates the narcissistic personality traits that likely contributed to his ability to commit these murders in the first place. The Chris Watts case offers several important lessons about recognizing potentially dangerous behavior in relationships. Financial stress. The Watts family was experiencing significant financial difficulties, which can increase domestic tensions. Personality changes. Friends and family later noted that Chris had become distant and different in the months leading up to the murders. Secretive behavior. Chris's affair required extensive deception and compartmentalization of his life. Lack of empathy. Chris's ability to lie convincingly to his wife, friends, and investigators demonstrates a concerning lack of empathy. All or nothing thinking. Rather than seeing divorce as one option among many, Chris viewed his situation as requiring a final, extreme solution. While Chris Watts will spend the rest of his life in prison, it's important to remember that this case is ultimately about 3 innocent victims and an unborn child whose lives were cut short. Shanann Watts, a vibrant 34-year-old woman who was building a career in health and wellness while raising 2 young daughters and preparing to welcome a 3rd child. Bella Watts, a bright 4-year-old who loved school and had her whole life ahead of her. Celeste Watts, a spirited 3-year-old whose personality was just beginning to emerge. Nico Watts, the unborn son who never had the chance to take his first breath. The Chris Watts case remains one of the most disturbing family annihilation cases in recent American history because it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the greatest danger comes from those closest to us. The man who was supposed to protect Shanann, Bella, and Celeste became their killer. Chris Watts's choice to murder his family rather than simply file for divorce reveals a level of selfishness and callousness that most people cannot comprehend. His case serves as a stark reminder that behind the facade of a perfect family, darkness can lurk, and that the warning signs of potential violence should never be ignored. The tragedy of the Watts family murders is not just in the loss of 3 innocent lives and an unborn child, but in the complete preventability of these deaths. A simple divorce, while emotionally and financially difficult, would have allowed all 4 victims to continue living their lives. Instead, Chris Watts's cowardice and narcissism led to one of the most senseless family murders in modern American history.